I was still in my wedding dress when I heard my father tell my mother to take my house away from me. Not sell it, not borrow it, take it. Tell your daughter to sign over the house, he said, low, behind the catering tent, before the lawyers get involved. I stood there in white lace, holding a box of gift bags, and my first thought wasn't even fear. It was disbelief. Lawyers? Nobody had told me there were lawyers. Nobody had told me there was anything to sign over. 3 hours earlier, this man had walked me down the aisle. My house, the one on Magnolia Lane that I'd bought 2 years before I even met my husband Ryan, the one I'd painted myself, room by room, on weekends when I was too broke to hire anyone. Sign it over to who? For what lawyers? My mother didn't answer him. She smoothed the front of her dress and glanced over her shoulder, checking whether anyone had heard. She saw me. I know she saw me. And she smiled the same practice smile she'd worn all night, then walked back toward the dance floor like nothing had happened. I didn't say anything. I put the gift bags in my trunk, went back inside, and danced with my husband to a song I couldn't tell you the name of now because my mind was somewhere else, running the same 4 words over and over. Before the lawyers get involved? What lawyers? Involved in what? I want you to understand something about my family before I go any further. We were the kind of family other people admired at church potlucks. My dad taught Sunday school for 11 years. My mom organized the neighborhood watch. We looked like people who'd never let a daughter fend for herself. I was 32 on the night of my wedding, and I still believed that. It would take me 6 weeks to find out my father had already spoken to a real estate agent about my house. Before I'd even said, I do. 6 weeks to sit in my own kitchen, staring at a for sale flyer with my address printed on it, that I never gave anyone permission to print. But that night, all I knew was this. Somewhere between the toasts and the last dance, my own parents had started a conversation about my house that didn't include me. And whatever it was, they didn't want me hearing it. I just didn't know yet how far back it went. I didn't confront them that night. In my family, you didn't raise your voice at a party. You smiled, thanked people for coming, and folded the moment small enough to carry home in your pocket. So that's what I did. I didn't sleep much. Ryan kept asking if I was okay, and I kept saying yes, just tired. But lying there in the dark, I kept coming back to something my dad had said to me months earlier, almost as a joke. That house is really more of a family investment, isn't it, Emma? I'd laughed it off at the time. I wasn't laughing anymore. 2 weeks after the wedding, Ryan and I came home from our honeymoon in the Outer Banks, salt still in our hair, suitcases still packed, and the first thing I saw, pulling into my own driveway, stopped the car before I even meant to stop it. A real estate sign. Staked straight into the front lawn, I'd reseated myself 2 summers ago. For sale. Call Denise Halloran, Coastal Realty Group. I sat there with my hands still on the wheel, and Ryan looked over at me like I'd suddenly forgotten how to drive. I hadn't forgotten anything. I just couldn't make my body move toward that sign yet, not with the suitcases still in the trunk and sand still in my shoes. I called the number before I even got the suitcases inside. Denise picked up on the second ring. Warm and professional. She said the listing had come through a family contact, the paperwork was already filed, and the owner wanted a quick, quiet sale before the market cooled. I asked as calmly as I could manage who exactly had listed my house. There was a pause. Then she said the name that made my stomach drop straight through the porch steps. My father. Not as my agent, not on my behalf, as the owner of record. I thanked her, hung up, and stood in my own driveway in the July heat, feeling like the ground had quietly rearranged itself underneath me while I was 300 miles away eating shrimp on a boardwalk. That night, I didn't tell Ryan everything. Not yet. I just asked him to help me find a box in the hall closet. The one with my old paperwork from when I bought the house. Back when I was 26 and terrified and so proud of that mortgage approval letter I'd framed it, briefly, before deciding that was a little much. We found the deed. We found the mortgage documents, and near the bottom, folded twice, we found something I didn't remember signing. A power of attorney form, dated the spring I was 28, the year I was recovering from a bad car accident on I-40, and spent 6 weeks barely able to hold a pen, let alone read fine print. My father's name was listed as my attorney in fact, full authority over property matters, financial decisions, anything requiring a signature. My signature was at the bottom. It looked like my signature. It didn't feel like my memory. I sat on the floor of that hallway with the form in my lap, and Ryan crouched beside me, quiet, letting me look at it as long as I needed to. I thought about the hospital bed, the pain medication, the blur of that whole spring. I thought about my father sitting beside me with a clipboard, telling me it was just insurance paperwork. Sign here, don't worry about the rest. I believed him. Of course I believed him. He was my father. I didn't sleep that night either. I lay there running the timeline backward further than I wanted to go. And for the first time since the wedding, I let myself ask the real question. If he'd had that kind of authority for 4 years, what else had he already done with it? Monday morning, Instead of unpacking the rest of our suitcases, I drove straight to the Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds. I'd never set foot in that building before in my life. I didn't know you could just walk in and ask a stranger behind a counter to pull up every document with your name on it, but apparently you can, and apparently I needed to know. The clerk, a woman named Patricia with reading glasses on a beaded chain, typed my address into the system and turned the monitor toward me without a word, like she'd seen that look before. There it was, a quitclaim deed, filed 11 months earlier, transferring partial ownership of my house from my name into a trust. The Caldwell Family Trust. I had never heard those 3 words together in my life. I asked Patricia to print everything. All of it. She didn't ask why. She just hit print. I sat in my car in that parking lot for a long time with the papers on the passenger seat. And for the first time since the wedding, I didn't feel shocked. I felt something colder and steadier settle in behind my ribs. My father hadn't just used an old power of attorney to sign a listing agreement. He had used it to move part of my house into a trust I'd never seen paperwork for, never signed knowingly, never even heard the name of until an hour ago. I called Ryan from the car. I told him everything this time. Start to finish, the flyer, Denise, the power of attorney, the trust. He was quiet for a second, and then he said the only thing that mattered. Okay, what do you need first? What I needed first was a lawyer who didn't share a last name with anyone at that wedding. I found one 2 days later, a woman named Grace Okafor who specialized in real property disputes. And I sat across from her desk with my folder of documents and watched her go, still the way professionals go still when something is worse than they expected. The first thing we do, she said, is revoke the power of attorney in writing and file it with the county. Today, before anything else moves. I signed the revocation that afternoon. Grace filed it herself, walked it over personally, and called me at 4:30 to confirm it was on record. That night, my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but I did because some part of me still wanted to hear her explain it in a way that made sense, that made this a misunderstanding instead of what I already knew it was. Emma, she said, your father heard from the county today, something about paperwork. Is everything all right? I looked at the folder on my kitchen table, at Grace's card sitting on top of it. At 4 years of my life, I hadn't known I'd signed away. Everything's fine, Mom, I said. I'm just finally handling my own paperwork. There was a long pause on the other end. And in that pause, I heard something I hadn't heard from my mother in 32 years. She didn't know what to say. 2 weeks after that phone call, my parents asked me to come to Sunday dinner. Just the 3 of us. No Kyle, no cousins, no pot roast performance for an audience. I almost said no. Then I decided I wanted to look my father in the eye when I said what I needed to say. So I went. He didn't wait for me to sit down. Emma, everything I did was to protect this family. That house is an asset. Your mother and I have retirement to think about and Kyle's business and Dad. I set my purse down on the counter, the same counter I used to do my homework on. You used a power of attorney. I signed in a hospital bed to try to sell my house without telling me. That's not protecting the family. That's protecting yourself from having to ask me first. My mother reached for my hand across the table, the way she used to when I was small and scared of a thunderstorm. I let her take it. I didn't pull away, but I didn't say it was okay either, because it wasn't. Not yet. We should have asked, she said quietly. I told your father we should have asked. That was as close to an apology as I got that night. And for a while, I thought it wasn't going to be enough. But Grace had already filed everything that mattered. The power of attorney was void. The quitclaim deed was being formally reversed, with my father's signature this time. The real kind, given freely in front of a notary who wasn't rushing him through it. The house on Magnolia Lane belonged to me and only me, on paper, the way it always should have. What surprised me wasn't the legal part. Lawyers are good at fixing paper. What surprised me was what came after. My father started calling before he visited, instead of just showing up with a spare key he'd somehow always kept. My mother stopped saying, family doesn't need permission, and started slowly asking for mine. It wasn't fixed overnight, and I won't pretend it was some perfect ending where everyone hugged and cried and nothing was ever tense again. Some Sundays were still quiet in the wrong way. Some conversations had to be had twice before they landed. But 6 months later, I stood in my own kitchen on Magnolia Lane, the one with my name and only my name on the deed, watching Ryan teach my father how to use the new grill we'd bought for the backyard. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safe in my own home, on my own terms. I used to think loving your family meant handing them everything, your signature, your trust, your silence, and hoping they'd never need to use it against you. I don't think that anymore. Real love asks first. Real love doesn't need a power of attorney to prove it cares. If you've ever had to protect something you loved from the people who were supposed to protect you, tell me in the comments. I promise you, you're not the only one at that table who finally learned to speak up.